Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. A massive update on this braking drama that occurred over the last couple of weeks. Red Bull are not in the same place now that they were at the start of the season. The rumour had it recently there was some asymmetric braking going on. There was a new rule added to the F1 regulations this year to say you could no longer do anything like that. The theory went, Red Bull were maybe doing something like that at the start of the season and therefore they're not allowed to any longer. Sources today are saying yes, that is exactly what's happened. Some sort of inertial braking device giving the Red Bull remarkable stability in the corners in the early part of the season. That's now no longer the case. The car is no longer the car it was at the start of the season. What does this mean for the state of Formula 1 as it stands? Because if this was actually against the rules in some way at the start of the year, does it question the validity of those race results they had with the RB20 at the start of the season? Very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. Plenty to get into today. On the driver market, first of all, Fernando Alonso, there's been talk from Flavio Briatore, his manager, of course, also working with Alpine now, when he might retire. He actually didn't say this. There was a community note to say that he was expected to retire at the end of 2026. Briatore doesn't really say that. In the actual quote, he says that technically the end of his deal is 2026, which is fair enough. Although who actually knows what happens if, shall we say, Max Verstappen were to join Aston Martin, which is on their radar, right? I mean, we know full well their intention, Aston, is to bring in Newey and then shortly afterwards probably to bring in Max Verstappen as well. That is probably not going to happen, but genuinely it may do given what they're currently doing. And if Max was to join, does Stroll go and Aston and Alonso stays? Or does Alonso go and Stroll stays, right? I mean, what is Alonso's future if Max Verstappen is wanted? Because let's be real, Alonso is not going to be driving for too much longer, and next year is not going to be a great year for Aston, really. I mean, 2023 was great, this year not anywhere near as good, and next year is probably going to be in many ways a carbon copy of this year in terms of Aston probably being like the 5th best team. So, you know, maybe they get a bit better, maybe they get a bit worse, but 2026 is their aim, and that's when Alonso will compete then. And I do probably think that this might be true. Depending what happens in 2026, that will determine Alonso's future. If they're not as competitive as he would want them to be, that will probably be it for him, you would imagine. Kind of interesting from Yuki Tsunoda's side as well. So RB, of course, V-Car, whatever you want to say, the team that he currently drives for, they say that if he keeps playing well or keeps driving well, then he will be considered for a promotion for Red Bull. But I feel like they've said this now for quite a long time. And like Helmut said it himself, in German you say a swallow doesn't make a summer, one swallow doesn't make a summer. What it means is if Yuki keeps racing on this level consistently, he will be considered for the seat in Red Bull Racing. But I mean, look, it doesn't seem especially likely to be at this point, given what's happened over the last few years. They just don't seem to think him as that kind of driver. And that's why there have been links for Yuki to Aston as well, because they're going to be the Honda Works team. But I think Yuki might be looking at that situation and saying, well, sure, Alonso's going to step away, but Stroll seems to not really be going anywhere anytime soon. And then there's the whole Max Verstappen question as well. Then again, though, if Max was to leave Red Bull to go to Aston, then Yuki probably wouldn't mind too much, because it might mean a door really would open at the top of Red Bull, as you might well expect it to. There was some other funny drama going around today with Max. So Kyle Larson, controversial character really, obviously, well, a versatile driver. He was driving in, I think he drove the Indy 500, didn't he, this year? And even though it got delayed, I don't know if he was able to make it to the NASCAR race that night, but I think that was the plan. Anyway, controversial, popular driver. He says he's a better driver than Max. That's what gives me ease and confidence that I know I'm better than him. Maybe not in an open wheel IndyCar or Formula 1 car, but that's only one discipline. I think I would beat him in everything else. You can quote me on that. Now, this is interesting, because maybe there's an argument on this on some level for certain drivers that are versatile, they've driven loads of different things, to be better than Formula 1 drivers over multiple disciplines. But if you're an F1 driver, you're very good at driving, generally speaking, and Max probably more so than most, given the fact that he's driven everything and his sim racing stuff is unbelievable. And Max has raced, you know, LMP2 or, you know, these kind of like hypercars. He's gone and done tests with them and has just absolutely blown away the guys that are standing behind the scenes with the, you know, the, let's say, the notepad and the pen and paper. So look, I don't buy it personally, and even whether he'd be better than Max at one single discipline, I don't really know. Like, people are going to say all he does is drive around in circles and all this. I just think it's an interesting quote. I respect the confidence on some level, but I feel like people don't you know, maybe appreciate how good Max is, and maybe on one day we could get to see a bit of a battle between the pair of them, but it may not never happen. Just quickly on the 2026 regulations, because they're meant to be quite restrictive. That's the current feeling, and I guess that makes a fair bit of sense. Ocon actually says he hopes they maintain that restrictiveness, because I think there's a feeling in the community, a fan base, shall we say, that restrictiveness is bad because it means that there's fewer options for what teams can do. You get less variability. That is true, I think, on some level, and to be fair, the engineers will often say, well, they look restrictive, but when you really get down to it, you can find that there are ways around certain things. There is more you can do than initially met the eye. The other point, though, that I hadn't really considered too much before, but I guess is true, that the more restrictive they are, the more similar the performances of the cars are going to be aerodynamically. But at the same time, then, that kind of means that if aero isn't as important, all of a sudden, engine becomes more important. And that's maybe why Ocon's current team in Alpine might be kind of interested in this, because if they have very tight aero regulations, that every car is going to be relatively similar, which hopefully isn't the case, but even if it is, engine performance becomes even more important as a percentage of overall performance, and therefore if Alpine have the Mercedes power units, that might make a fair bit of sense. Ocon, though, is going to Haas, so is he still going to be there in a couple of years' time? Is that going to be Ferrari powered still? Probably yes. Are they going to have the strongest power unit? Who knows? Thought it was an interesting bit of a debate regardless, though. Mercedes, quickly on them before we get into the Red Bull stuff, because they've obviously made massive progress this season, more though they need to fix. They actually talked about their tyre temperature issues. They've generally been better at the colder circuits. When it's been colder, when it's been cooler, better conditions for their car, they've been in a much better window. The hotter tracks have not suited them so well. Even back in Bahrain, they had like temperature issues with their car in general due to the heat of Bahrain that surprised them a lot. But their tyres, they can't seem to find the right window in certain temperatures, and basically they're saying, we can't just fix that overnight. It's an overall characteristic thing that we've got to work on, but they do say they've got more important upgrades in the pipeline. They will need to bring some new things, as of course will Red Bull, and that's what we're going to talk about now, because teams' points over 2024, this is what it looks like, and Red Bull started the season so well. This isn't even like Verstappen's tally, this is just Verstappen and Perez, but the gap between, let's say, Red Bull and McLaren after a few races, kind of even around about Miami compared to where it is now, is drastically different. Most of that is Perez, but obviously a large part of that is merely the pure performance from Red Bull. Average performance, though, still favours Red Bull, right? Overall, over the course of the season, they've still had the fastest car. We've looked at the data before over the last couple of months, really, looking at where they were. Let me just turn down the brightness here 1 second. In China, for example, Verstappen was basically a second lap quicker than anybody else in the field. So the performance gap was absolutely unbelievable. But obviously, after really China going into Miami, things have been different. I mean, Verstappen isn't a normal driver, so his results haven't been as good as they were at the start of the year, but have still been very good. If you look at Perez, he went from getting 18, 18, 10, 18, 21, 18 to 4, 0, 0, 4, 7, 0, 6, 7. So, you know, the gap between effectively Miami and for the rest of the season, even maybe, you know, China to the rest of the season, has been drastic in terms of the overall Red Bull performance. And this is when the questions have been raised as to exactly what was going on. So a couple of weeks ago now, we talked about this rumour that was mentioned during the Hungarian Grand Prix weekends, that there was something discovered on the Red Bull car, and this apparently was a rumour that multiple teams were parroting behind the scenes in the paddock. There was something on the Red Bull car that was problematic, discovered to be illegal was the rumour at the time, that was asked to be removed, and therefore their performance has dropped off. And even Red Bull themselves have hinted at this. Most of their engineers will tell you, oh, well, no, the other team has just caught up, you know, like, we haven't regressed, it's just the other team has got better. The data doesn't, in my opinion, really fully validate that, like, maybe on some level, but that clearly Ferrari and Mercedes and McLaren, if you look at the data, they haven't caught up half a second to a second overnight. Like, that's just not happened. Red Bull have regressed to some degree. There's really, in my opinion, there's no doubt about it. I don't think it can be just the other teams caught up. So then a few days later, we saw this. This is in Article 11 of the regulations on the brake system, and there was this additional clause or whatever added into the regulations. Any system or mechanism which can produce systematically or intentionally asymmetric braking torques for a given axle is forbidden. Now, the interesting thing is, the first part of this phrase basically already says this, right? The brake system must be designed so that the forces applied to the brake pads are the same magnitude and act as opposing pairs. So to me, that's pretty clear cut, that you can't have asymmetric braking, the magnitude of the force must be the same on both sides. And the second part says, if you have a system that does that, that's forbidden. But it's like, you've already said that's forbidden. So, to me, if someone was doing something that counters the point in purple, they were already doing something to counter the point in black. So, you know, if it was against the rules now, I feel like it was still against the rules a few races ago. But intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. The question then was, what was this about? Was anyone doing this? Or was this just somebody put in a request and said, hey, we think somebody might be doing this, so maybe have a look at it? Or was there an argument that actually, no, somebody was doing this, and therefore there was questions as to who was doing this and who it might have been? Of course, the speculation was it Red Bull, right? Because the way they started their season to the way that it's going now, very different. Max hasn't won a race in like the last 4 rounds. That's absolutely unheard of over the last 3 seasons. Now, we have a new update from Racing News 365 today, because I said when we talked about this a couple of videos ago, week and a half, whatever it was, that journalists will have heard about this, right? It will be around the press. The question is, does anyone hear enough from sources to actually want to publish anything about it? And today we finally get a publication that is willing to talk about it, because here we go from Racing News 365, and Paolo Filicetti is talking about this, and as we scroll down on the left-hand side, they talk through the information, the details, and some of the discussion that we've just had on the changes. This is, though, where they go on to the next discussion on what this actually means. And let me make sure this is kind of fully on screen, just about. There we go. From Racing News 365 sources, it appears that the RB20, up until the Chinese Grand Prix, so literally every Grand Prix they dominated, Miami onwards, not the case at all, mounted an inertial valve on the braking system section at the rear, downstream of the brake-by-wire system. So this is getting now very specific on what Red Bull apparently have done. So in practice, a valve with a T connection received a single hydraulic pressure directed to the rear axle by the brake-by-wire, which could then be precisely directed with greater pressure to the left or right of the rear axle, depending on the way the car was turning through a corner. So maybe this is the loophole that Red Bull were exploiting, because they're having a single pressure, but then they would direct it with a different pressure to the left or the right side. So let's look at the regulations again real quick that say the forces applied to the brake pads must be of the same magnitude. So, like, I don't see, I know the colours are messing up, I still don't know what's going on there exactly, but I don't see how, if this was against the rules now with this additional purple bit, it must have been against the rules before, right? Like, am I not reading this right? Like, I mean, if this is true, and this is now more detail than we've ever had before on the matter, that apparently, according to sources, behind the scenes information, whatever, take it with a grain of salt, but this is sources, not even just source, this is sources that apparently are saying that they've been able to provide different braking magnitudes to the different, you know, axle at the rear part of the car, which is a massively important deal. I mean, McLaren managed to do this with the third pedal back in the 90s, and they said that it gained them about half a second a lap, which, let's be honest, that was basically Red Bull's advantage over the last couple of years. So, you know, depending on which way the car was turning through a corner, and this is, as they go on to say, it is correct to point out that the inertial valve is not part of the components supplied to the team by the manufacturer of the braking system. So this is their own components that they've come up with that no other team has. Furthermore, the inertial valve only has its function when the car approaches the corner entry phase, since in a straight line at the start of the braking action, the pressure between the right and left remains identical, with the sphere placed exactly at the center of the T. Having said that, it should be clarified that the advantages of such a system are concentrated above all in the handling of the car. Cornering precision becomes absolute and understeer disappears. These are traits the RB20 has progressively lost from Miami onwards, something not even subsequent upgrades have managed to remedy. Even Helmut Marko the other day said, our car does not have the balance that it did at the start of the season. Like, you can't tell me it's the same car they have now as they had at the start of the year, in my opinion. And, well, this indication says that. In any case, were Red Bull using such a system from the start of the year, it would have been completely legal given the wording of the technical regulations at the time, and there would be no basis for an FIA action. So that's what they say. I don't know. I mean, I guess that's the read of the regulations. I'm not an expert on the way these regulations should be read to comment on whether it would have been legal or not. You know, but if this is true, it is incredible, is it not? Because if they were using it now, then were they not using it last year as well? But this is the most clear information that we've ever had really so far on exactly what Red Bull were doing, because using this, you know, kind of loophole in a way to asymmetrically brake the rear axle. I mean, when you watch that Red Bull over the last couple of years, it seems unbelievably stable through the corners, right? It's like absolutely on rails, never really understeer or oversteer moments. Like if you watch some of Verstappen's pole laps from the start of this season, there's no corrections needed to be made. I mean, it's different now. You watch a Verstappen lap at the moment, it's a different story. Verstappen's complaining in Hungary about the understeer of the car and stuff like this. So, I don't know. To me, the kind of anecdotal evidence of what I've watched with my own eyes this season backs up what is being said there. And it's incredible if this is true, but also it's incredible if this does become more well known and people start talking about it more and the other teams start talking about it more. What might they say about the situation? Just because if I'm another team and it comes out that Red Bull have been using this loophole in the braking to gain a massive competitive advantage for the start of this season and maybe last year and the year before as well, and honestly at this point who even knows, you know, maybe it technically was legal, so there's no basis for an FIA sanction, but Max is probably going to win this driver's title with a car which is now illegal, but wasn't illegal apparently a few rounds ago. So, you know, I don't know, man. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section. Of course, the car now isn't illegal because they had to change things. What I mean is the car that they had at the start of the season, the Max was getting pole position, race win, fastest lap, etc., is... That car that you had at the time, apparently, is now no longer legal in the regulations as they're currently written a few rounds later. So, you know, crazy stuff. I don't think this should maybe be a massive surprise on what we've seen over the last couple of years. I think there was always got to be something going on. Like, the performance advantage Red Bull had last year, this year was so ridiculous that, like, there had to be something, and apparently this was the something. So, tweet your thoughts in the comments. Just before we close out, mid-season driver rankings, getting down to the business end of this point. Hulkenberg, number 6. This is actually really cool to see. He's been killing it, of course, in the Haas this year compared to Kevin and Magnussen, doing a stellar job, putting up points. Number 6 for Hulkenberg. Number 5 for Charles Leclerc as well. He had a great start to the season, somewhat fallen off lately on some level, but I don't think a lot of that is his fault, to be fair. I do think the car has unfortunately regressed to a great extent. Piastri gets 3rd. He's had a really good kind of progression throughout the season, but I do think there's a bit of recency bias in play here. Piastri gets 4th, I think maybe I said 3rd, just because he didn't start the season really that great. There were questions a few rounds in as to whether he needed to progress faster with respect to Lando. And Lando is actually going to be even higher than this because George Russell gets number 3. I personally think Lando at number 2, or whatever you want to put him, Max or whatever, certainly up there. Max is going to be number 1, no doubt, mid-season here, but Russell gets 3rd, which I guess means Lando is 2nd, which is, you know, I don't know. I think Lando would deserve it over some performances, but the latter half of the season, or the latter half of the first part of the season, obviously Lando's made a few more mistakes, but very much enjoyed your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.